Detective Sarah Chen had seen many strange cases in her 15 years with the Metropolitan Police, but nothing quite like this. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday morning. A security guard at the prestigious Blackwater Financial Tower had discovered something that would shake the foundations of the city's elite circles. Marcus Rivera, a former military man turned night security guard, had been making his routine rounds when he noticed something odd about the executive floor. The penthouse office of billionaire businessman Victor Sterling was lit up despite Sterling being out of the country on business. Marcus decided to investigate, using his master key to enter the lavish office suite. What he found inside made his blood run cold. Scattered across Sterling's mahogany desk were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be blackmail materials involving several high-profile politicians and business leaders. The papers detailed a secret network called The Circle that had been operating for decades, manipulating elections, business deals, and even international policies. Among the most shocking documents was a ledger showing payments to various officials, including Mayor Jonathan Hayes, who was currently running for governor. The amounts were staggering, reaching into millions of dollars. Each payment was linked to specific political favors and policy changes that had benefited Sterling's vast business empire. Marcus quickly photographed several key documents with his phone, his hands shaking as he realized the magnitude of what he had discovered. The evidence showed that the Circle had been responsible for covering up numerous scandals, silencing witnesses, and eliminating anyone who threatened to expose their operations. But Marcus wasn't alone in the building that night. As he finished photographing the last document, he heard the elevator doors opening on the executive floor. Panic set in as he realized someone was coming. He quickly gathered a few of the most damning documents, stuffed them into his jacket, and looked for an escape route. The footsteps in the hallway grew louder and more urgent. Marcus recognized the voice of Sterling's personal assistant, Elena Kozlov, speaking in hushed Russian to someone on the phone. She was supposed to be in Moscow with Sterling, yet here she was, clearly engaged in damage control. Marcus managed to slip out through the emergency stairwell, but not before overhearing Elena mention something about a cleanup operation and eliminating the security risk. He realized with growing horror that they knew about his discovery, and his life was now in immediate danger. Racing down 23 flights of stairs, Marcus made it to the parking garage and drove straight to the police station. But as he sat in the lobby waiting to speak with Detective Chen, he began to feel dizzy and disoriented. His vision blurred and a sharp pain shot through his chest. The documents he had risked everything to obtain were now burning a hole in his jacket pocket, but Marcus was fighting a different battle. Something was very wrong with his body, and the timing couldn't be more suspicious. As Detective Chen approached him in the waiting area, Marcus collapsed to the floor, clutching the evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful criminal networks in the country. The last thing Marcus saw before losing consciousness was Detective Chen's concerned face hovering over him, and her urgent call for medical assistance. The documents scattered across the floor, and Marcus wondered if he would live long enough to see justice served, or if the Circle had already set in motion a plan to silence him forever. Detective Sarah Chen knelt beside Marcus Rivera's unconscious form, her mind racing as she gathered the scattered documents from the police station floor. The papers contained explosive allegations that could topple the city's power structure, but her immediate concern was the man who had risked everything to bring them forward. The paramedics arrived within minutes, quickly stabilizing Marcus and rushing him to Metropolitan General Hospital. Dr. Amanda Walsh, the emergency room physician, immediately suspected poisoning when she examined Marcus's symptoms. His pupils were constricted, his breathing was labored, and blood tests revealed traces of a rare neurotoxin that was virtually undetectable unless specifically tested for. Sarah stayed by Marcus's bedside as he drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling about the Circle and warning her to trust no one. The documents he had retrieved painted a picture of corruption that reached into every level of government and law enforcement. Sarah realized she couldn't trust anyone in her own department, as several names of police officials appeared in Sterling's ledger. While Marcus fought for his life, Sarah began her own investigation into Victor Sterling and the Circle. She discovered that Sterling's business empire was built on a foundation of blackmail, bribery, and intimidation. The network had tentacles reaching into media companies, pharmaceutical corporations, and even international arms dealers. The most disturbing revelation came when Sarah found records showing that the Circle had been systematically eliminating anyone who threatened their operations. A pattern emerged of whistleblowers, journalists, and former members who had died under suspicious circumstances. Heart attacks, car accidents, and sudden illnesses that were never properly investigated. Sarah's research was interrupted when she received a call from Dr. Walsh. Marcus had regained consciousness and was asking for her urgently. Despite his weakened condition, Marcus was determined to share everything he knew before the Circle could silence him permanently. In the hospital room, Marcus revealed that he had been investigating Sterling for months after noticing irregularities in the building's security logs. Important visitors who weren't recorded, meetings that happened after hours, and suspicious packages being delivered to Sterling's office. He had been building his own case file, hidden in a secure location that only he knew about. The most shocking revelation came when Marcus told Sarah about a conversation he had overheard between Sterling and Elena Kozlov 3 weeks earlier. They had been discussing plans for a major political assassination that would clear the way for their candidate to win the upcoming gubernatorial election. The target was Rebecca Morrison, the reform candidate who had been gaining momentum with her anti-corruption platform. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. Morrison was scheduled to speak at a major campaign rally in just 2 days, and if Marcus's information was accurate, the Circle was planning to eliminate her in front of thousands of witnesses while making it look like the work of a lone gunman. But even as Marcus shared this critical information, his condition began to deteriorate again. Dr. Walsh discovered that someone had accessed Marcus's medical chart and altered his treatment plan, introducing medications that were counteracting the antidotes for the poison. The Circle had infiltrated the hospital and was continuing their attempt to silence him. Sarah knew she was running out of time. With Marcus barely clinging to life and a political assassination planned for 2 days away, she had to find a way to expose the Circle while keeping herself alive. The documents Marcus had obtained were just the beginning, but she needed the rest of his evidence to build a case that would bring down the entire network. As she prepared to leave the hospital to search for Marcus's hidden files, Sarah noticed a familiar face in the hallway. Detective Lieutenant James Morrison, her own supervisor and Rebecca Morrison's brother, was speaking quietly with Dr. Walsh. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that the corruption might have already reached the person she had been planning to trust with this explosive information. Detective Sarah Chen watched in horror as Lieutenant Morrison approached Marcus Rivera's hospital room. Her mind raced through the possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Was Morrison part of the Circle, or was he simply trying to protect his sister from an unknown threat? Sarah couldn't take any chances. She quickly ducked into a supply closet and called Marcus on the hospital phone, warning him to pretend to be unconscious if anyone except her entered his room. Through the small window in the closet door, Sarah observed Morrison speaking with Dr. Walsh, their conversation growing increasingly heated. Morrison was demanding access to Marcus's medical records and insisting that the case be transferred to federal jurisdiction. Dr. Walsh stood firm, citing patient confidentiality and the ongoing medical emergency, but Sarah noticed something troubling in Morrison's demeanor. He seemed more concerned about containing information than protecting his sister or seeking justice. After Morrison left, Sarah waited 30 minutes before returning to Marcus's room. She found him weak but alert, and together they devised a plan to retrieve his hidden evidence before the Circle could locate it. Marcus had concealed his investigation files in an abandoned subway maintenance tunnel beneath the city, a location known only to him from his days working construction before joining the military. Sarah knew she needed help, but couldn't trust anyone in law enforcement. Instead, she reached out to investigative journalist David Kim, who had been trying to expose political corruption for years but never had enough evidence to make his stories stick. David had built a reputation for protecting his sources and had contacts in the federal government who operated outside the Circle's influence meeting. David at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city, Sarah shared Marcus's documents and the shocking revelations about the planned assassination. David's expertise in digital forensics proved invaluable, as he authenticated the documents and traced their origins through metadata and paper analysis. The evidence was legitimate, but they needed more to convince authorities to take immediate action. Together, Sarah and David ventured into the abandoned subway tunnel system to retrieve Marcus's complete files. The tunnels were dark, damp, and filled with the echoes of their footsteps as they navigated using Marcus's detailed directions. What they found exceeded their wildest expectations. Marcus had assembled a comprehensive archive of the Circle's operations spanning 2 decades. Financial records, audio recordings, photographs, and even video evidence of meetings where illegal activities were planned and executed. The scope of the corruption was breathtaking, involving not just local politics but international arms deals, human trafficking networks, and pharmaceutical companies testing illegal drugs on unwilling subjects. Among the most damning evidence was a recording of Victor Sterling discussing the planned assassination of Rebecca Morrison. His voice was clear and unmistakable as he outlined the operation, including the selection of a mentally unstable individual who would be manipulated into carrying out the attack and then eliminated to prevent him from revealing the truth. But as Sarah and David examined the evidence, they heard sounds echoing through the tunnels. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness and voices spoke in the same Russian accent Sarah had heard from Elena Kozlov. The Circle had somehow tracked them to Marcus's hiding place, and they were no longer alone in the underground maze. The pursuit through the tunnels became a deadly game of cat and mouse. Sarah and David had to navigate the complex underground system while carrying boxes of evidence and staying ahead of their pursuers. The tunnels were a labyrinth of intersecting passages, dead ends, and maintenance shafts that could either provide escape routes or become deadly traps. During their escape, Sarah overheard radio communications between their pursuers revealing that the Circle had accelerated their timeline. Rebecca Morrison's assassination was moved up to the following day, during a surprise campaign stop at the city's main library. The change in schedule was designed to catch security forces off guard and make it easier for their operative to get close to the target. Sarah and David managed to escape through an emergency exit that led to an alley behind a shopping center, but they realized their situation had become even more desperate. With less than 18 hours before the assassination attempt, they had to find a way to warn Rebecca Morrison and expose the Circle's plot without getting themselves killed in the process. The evidence they had retrieved was comprehensive, but they needed to get it to someone with enough power and integrity to act on it immediately. As they sat in David's car planning their next move, Sarah noticed suspicious vehicles circling the area. The Circle was closing in, and their window of opportunity was shrinking rapidly. Sarah Chen and David Kim raced through the city streets, constantly checking their mirrors for signs of pursuit. The evidence they carried could save Rebecca Morrison's life and bring down the Circle, but they were running out of time and options. Every law enforcement contact Sarah had considered reaching out to appeared compromised according to Marcus's files. David suggested contacting FBI agent Lisa Park, a federal investigator who had been working corruption cases independently and had a reputation for being incorruptible. Agent Park had been investigating financial irregularities in several major corporations, and David believed she might be the one person they could trust with this explosive information. They arranged to meet Agent Park at a secure location, an abandoned warehouse on the industrial side of town that David had used before for sensitive meetings. When they arrived, Park was already there with 2 other agents, but something felt wrong. The agents seemed too relaxed for people about to receive evidence of a massive conspiracy and imminent assassination. Sarah's police instincts kicked in as she noticed the agents' body language and positioning. They were blocking potential exit routes and keeping their hands near their weapons. Park's questioning became increasingly aggressive, focusing more on how they had obtained the evidence than on the content of the revelations. The situation deteriorated rapidly when Park revealed that she had been working with the Circle for years, helping to cover up their operations in exchange for substantial payments and career advancement. The FBI agents with her were also compromised, and they had been sent to retrieve the evidence and eliminate Sarah and David. A violent confrontation erupted in the warehouse as Sarah and David fought for their lives. Sarah's police training proved crucial as she managed to disarm one of the agents, while David used his knowledge of the warehouse layout to create diversions and escape routes. During the chaos, they managed to escape with most of the evidence intact. But their situation had become desperate. With the Circle having infiltrated both local law enforcement and federal agencies, Sarah realized they needed to go public with the information immediately. David suggested streaming a live broadcast over social media, presenting all the evidence in real time so it couldn't be suppressed or discredited. They set up in David's apartment, which was equipped with professional broadcasting equipment from his journalism work. As they prepared to go live, Sarah received a call from the hospital. Marcus Rivera had taken a turn for the worse, and Dr. Walsh suspected that someone had introduced another toxin into his system during the shift change. Racing back to the hospital while David prepared the broadcast, Sarah found Marcus barely conscious but desperate to share one final piece of information. He revealed that the Circle had a backup plan in case their assassination plot was exposed. They intended to stage a terrorist attack at the library that would kill hundreds of people, including Rebecca Morrison, and blame it on international terrorists. The scale of the Circle's ruthlessness was staggering. They were willing to murder innocent civilians to maintain their power and eliminate a political threat. Marcus also revealed that he had planted additional evidence in Victor Sterling's office that would prove the terrorist plot, but it was hidden in a place only he knew about. With Marcus slipping into unconsciousness again, Sarah had to make an impossible choice. She could stay with the dying man who had sacrificed everything to expose the truth, or she could retrieve the final piece of evidence that would prevent a mass casualty event. The library event was scheduled to begin in just 6 hours. Sarah chose to honor Marcus's sacrifice by completing his mission. She returned to Blackwater Financial Tower, using her police credentials and Marcus's information to access Sterling's office one final time. The building was eerily quiet in the pre-dawn hours, with only minimal security personnel on duty. In Sterling's private bathroom, hidden behind a false panel that Marcus had discovered during his months of investigation, Sarah found detailed plans for the terrorist attack. The documents revealed that the Circle had recruited a group of extremists and provided them with explosives, planning to detonate them during Morrison's speech when the library would be packed with supporters and media. But as Sarah photographed the evidence, she heard familiar voices in the hallway. Victor Sterling had returned early from his trip, accompanied by Elena Kozlov and several armed associates. They had discovered that their office had been compromised and were conducting a thorough search for any remaining evidence. Trapped in Sterling's office with nowhere to run, Sarah realized she was about to come face to face with the mastermind of the Circle. Her phone had no signal from the high floor, and security cameras had been monitoring her every move since she entered the building. The evidence she had gathered would die with her unless she could find a way to escape and warn the authorities about the impending attack. The sound of Sterling's voice grew closer as he entered his office suite, and Sarah prepared for a confrontation that would determine whether hundreds of innocent people would live or die, and whether the Circle's decades of corruption would finally be exposed to the world. Detective Sarah Chen pressed herself against the bathroom wall in Victor Sterling's office, her heart pounding as she heard footsteps approaching. Through the crack in the door, she could see Sterling himself, a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s whose calm demeanor masked the ruthlessness that had built his criminal empire. Elena Kozlov was with him, speaking rapidly in Russian as she reported on their containment efforts. Sarah understood enough to realize they were discussing Marcus Rivera's condition and the hunt for the stolen documents. Sterling's response was chillingly matter-of-fact as he ordered the final cleanup to begin immediately. Sarah knew she had to get the terrorist plot evidence to David, who was preparing to broadcast their exposé. She carefully opened the bathroom window, which faced an adjacent building with a fire escape system. The gap between buildings was only about 8 feet, but they were 23 floors above the street. Using techniques from her police academy training, Sarah managed to leap across to the fire escape of the neighboring building. The wind was fierce at that height, and she barely caught the metal railing as her feet slipped on the wet surface. Behind her, she could hear Sterling's voice growing, agitated as he discovered the open window and realized someone had been in his office. Sarah climbed down several floors before entering the adjacent building through an unlocked maintenance door. The building housed several tech companies, and she was able to find a computer terminal to send the terrorist plot evidence to David's secure email account. But as she was uploading the files, building security appeared, having been alerted by Sterling's people. Another chase ensued through the corporate offices, With Sarah using her knowledge of building layouts to stay ahead of her pursuers, she managed to escape through a loading dock, but not before overhearing radio communications that revealed the Circle was accelerating their timeline again. The terrorist attack was now scheduled to occur in just 3 hours. During Rebecca Morrison's morning press conference, racing across the city, Sarah arrived at David's apartment to find him already broadcasting live to thousands of viewers. He had been presenting Marcus's evidence methodically, building a compelling case against the Circle while protecting Sarah's identity as his source. The response was immediate and explosive, with social media amplifying the revelations faster than the Circle could suppress them. But their broadcast was interrupted by breaking news reports. Victor Sterling was holding his own press conference, claiming that a rogue security guard had stolen confidential business documents and that a terrorist plot had been discovered targeting the morning's political event. Sterling was positioning himself as a concerned citizen helping authorities prevent an attack while simultaneously discrediting Marcus's evidence as fabricated documents created by extremists. Sarah realized that Sterling was executing a masterful counter-strategy. By revealing parts of the terrorist plot himself and claiming to be helping prevent it, he could eliminate Rebecca Morrison while appearing to be a hero who had tried to save her. The attack would proceed as planned, but Sterling would avoid suspicion by having publicly warned about it. The situation became even more complex when Lieutenant Morrison appeared on television, standing beside Sterling and vouching for his credibility. Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. Morrison was indeed part of the Circle, and he was using his position to lend law enforcement credibility to Sterling's narrative. With less than 2 hours before the attack, Sarah and David had to find a way to reach Rebecca Morrison directly and convince her that her own brother was part of the plot against her. But Morrison's campaign headquarters was surrounded by security personnel who had been briefed to treat Sarah as a dangerous fugitive wanted in connection with terrorist activities. David suggested using his media connections to reach Morrison through her press team, but most journalists were either compromised or too afraid to get involved after seeing what had happened to others who had opposed the Circle. They needed someone with direct access to Morrison who couldn't be bought or intimidated. The breakthrough came when Sarah remembered that Rebecca Morrison had a personal bodyguard, retired Marine Colonel James Rodriguez, who had served with Sarah's father in the military. Rodriguez had an impeccable reputation and was known to be fiercely loyal to Morrison personally, not to political interests. Sarah managed to reach Rodriguez through military channels, using her father's service record to establish credibility. Rodriguez listened carefully as Sarah presented the evidence and explained the imminent threat. His military experience helped him quickly assess the credibility of the information, and he agreed to evacuate Morrison immediately. But as Rodriguez moved to implement emergency protocols, he discovered that Morrison's official security detail was actively preventing the evacuation. The Circle had infiltrated her protection team, and they were ensuring she would be in position for the planned attack. Rodriguez found himself in a firefight with people who were supposed to be protecting his principal. The final hour before the attack became a desperate race against time as Rodriguez, Sarah, and David worked together to expose the Circle's plot while keeping Rebecca Morrison alive. The terrorist operatives were already in position at the library, the explosives were armed, and Sterling's media narrative was being accepted by authorities who were unwittingly helping to ensure the attack's success. Sarah realized that the only way to stop the Circle was to capture Sterling himself and force him to call off the attack in front of live cameras, proving his involvement in the plot and saving hundreds of lives in the process. The final confrontation was about to begin. Detective Sarah Chen, journalist David Kim, and Colonel Rodriguez had 30 minutes to prevent a mass casualty event and expose the Circle's conspiracy. Their plan was audacious and dangerous. Capture Victor Sterling live on television and force him to reveal the truth about the terrorist plot. Sterling was scheduled to appear on the morning news show, presenting himself as the concerned businessman who had helped uncover the terrorist threat. Sarah and David arrived at the television station, while Rodriguez worked to keep Rebecca Morrison safe in a secure location away from the library. Using David's media credentials, they gained access to the studio building. But the Circle had anticipated this possibility, and Elena Kozlov was waiting with a team of operatives disguised as private security. A violent confrontation erupted in the television station's corridors as Sarah fought her way toward the studio where Sterling was about to go live. The battle moved into the studio itself just as Sterling began his interview with news anchor Patricia Wells. Viewers across the city watched in shock as armed individuals burst into the live broadcast. But Sterling maintained his composure, claiming that Sarah was one of the terrorists he had been warning about. David managed to reach the control room and override the studio cameras, ensuring that everything being said would be broadcast live to the entire metropolitan area. With millions of people watching, Sarah confronted Sterling with the evidence of his crimes, including the audio recordings of him planning Rebecca Morrison's assassination. Sterling initially denied everything, but his composure began to crack when Sarah revealed specific details about the Circle's operations that only an insider would know. Elena Kozlov, realizing that their exposure was imminent, made a desperate attempt to silence Sarah permanently, drawing a concealed weapon during the live broadcast. The confrontation reached its climax when Colonel Rodriguez burst into the studio with backup officers who had finally been convinced of the truth. In the ensuing chaos, Elena shot Sterling rather than allow him to be captured alive. But not before Sterling, in his dying moments, confirmed Sarah's allegations and provided the abort codes for the terrorist operation. With Sterling's confession broadcast live to millions of viewers, the terrorist operatives at the library were quickly apprehended by authorities who finally understood the true nature of the threat. The explosives were safely disarmed, and Rebecca Morrison's life was saved with only minutes to spare. The aftermath of the exposé was swift and comprehensive. Lieutenant Morrison and dozens of other officials were arrested as the full scope of the Circle's corruption was revealed. Marcus Rivera survived his poisoning ordeal and was hailed as a hero for his courage in exposing the conspiracy. Federal investigations were launched into every aspect of the Circle's operations, leading to the dismantling of networks spanning multiple countries and industries. The evidence that Marcus had risked his life to gather resulted in hundreds of arrests and the recovery of billions of dollars in stolen assets. Sarah Chen was promoted to lead a new anti-corruption task force, working with federal agencies to prevent similar conspiracies from taking root in the future. David Kim won several journalism awards for his role in exposing the Circle, and his live broadcast became a case study in investigative reporting and citizen journalism. Dr. Amanda Walsh continued treating Marcus Rivera, who eventually made a full recovery and returned to his security work with a new appreciation for the power of ordinary citizens to fight corruption. Colonel Rodriguez remained Rebecca Morrison's head of security, as she went on to win the gubernatorial election by the largest margin in state history. The most significant outcome was the implementation of new transparency requirements for political, funding, and business operations. Rebecca Morrison's first act as governor was to sign legislation creating independent oversight bodies with real power to investigate corruption and protect whistleblowers. 6 months after the confrontation, Sarah visited Marcus at his new job training security personnel for government buildings. The city had changed dramatically in the wake of the Circle's exposure, with citizens more engaged in politics and new safeguards in place to prevent similar conspiracies. Looking out over the city from the top of the building where everything had started, Sarah reflected on how one person's courage to do the right thing had changed everything. Marcus had risked his life to expose the truth, and that single act of bravery had toppled a criminal network that had operated with impunity for decades. The story became a reminder that corruption thrives in darkness but cannot survive in the light of truth. Marcus Rivera's decision to investigate suspicious activities and Sarah Chen's determination to see justice done had proven that ordinary people, working together, could overcome even the most powerful criminal organizations. As Sarah prepared to leave that day, she received word that similar investigations were being launched in other cities, inspired by their success. The Circle had been just one tentacle of a larger network of corruption, but they had proven that with courage, determination, and the willingness to risk everything for justice, even the most entrenched systems of power could be brought down and replaced with transparency and accountability.